Hi, it's Penny here, and this is going to be another episode of the series where I am trying the first chapter of every book series that I'm interested in reading. In this video, I'm going to focus on book series where either I've read them in my late teens, early 20s, or I should have read them in my 20s because I know I would have loved them at that time, or at least that they were around at that time. So primarily, I think these are fantasy series published in like the 80s or the 90s by female authors, which was pretty much all I read back then, I think. And usually for these videos, I try and get a bunch of them from the library. However, I could only get this one from the library, and every other one I've had to get digitally. And in fact, there are 3 that I wasn't even able to get digitally. So I guess I'll have to keep my eye out for those. 2 of them I never read, and one of them I did read, and I really loved it. And it had cats, talking cats, I think. I'm sure they were talking. So at some point I'll try and track those down. But for now, we're going to start by reading Priestess of the White by Trudi Canavan. So this is one of the ones that I didn't read when I was younger, but I should have, because Trudi Canavan is an Australian author. I'm pretty sure I've got that right. Probably tells you in the back, Penny. No, it doesn't. But the front tells me that it was published in Australia, so I'll assume I'm right, that Trudi Canavan is an Australian author. And I'm actually going to try 2 of her series in this video. This is the first book in the Age of 5 trilogy. And then I will also try The Magician's Guild, which is the first book in the Black Magician trilogy, but I think that's a series with 2 trilogies kind of in the same world. I did look up the reading order, so I shouldn't be getting this wrong. But I'm going to start with this one. Honestly, I know nothing about it except that somebody at some point recommended this to me, and it really does seem like something I would have read in my 20s, so I'm going to try it. So I read both the prologue and the first chapter of this. The prologue, we're following a young girl who I think is going to be our main character, and her name is Aurea. So in the prologue, she basically does this like Katniss Everdeen moment where she's like, I volunteer myself as sacrifice so that she can go and help with this negotiation between the White, or the Priestess of the White, which the White, I think, are like the gods or the religion, and there are 5 priestesses of the White, but one position is still open, and like 10 years later in the first chapter, she's becoming the 5th priestess of the White, which I guess is why this is called Priestess of the White. She is being set up, I feel like, as quite perfect, amazing person, like, oh, she's so magical and gifted and wonderful and clever, like so much cleverer than all these other adults. So I'm a bit worried about that. Although in the first chapter, we didn't actually get her perspective, but it looks like the second chapter is from her perspective. In the first chapter, we get this guy who's going to be her like guide, or what was the word they used? I just read this and I forgot already because we also got another thing, which I'll tell you about. Her advisor, that's the word. He's going to be her advisor, and she can actually read his mind. So like he just has to think his advice and then she can act on it. And she's just become, in the first chapter, this Priestess of the White, and she's going to learn about her position. And I did also read the back of the book says that there is going to be a black-clad sorcerer who is trying to annihilate the White. So I guess she's going to have to deal with that. As well, in the first chapter, we got the perspective of this guy who's not really a guy, or it seems like he's some kind of like small person with wings, and there's this whole race of small people with wings, and their hands are like attached to their wings so they can only do limited things. So in the first chapter, he was basically just trying to hunt this like deer or something. Big deer though, because he said that the deer was bigger than him. Does that mean that the deer was really big or that he's really small? I'm not sure. I think he might be quite small because he can fly, right? And it seems like the story is also going to deal with his relationship with his peers. They're always teasing him because he likes to make inventions. So normally they can't hunt these giant deer, but he's managed to make these like spikes he can drop that will like poison them. So that was the setup. I'm most interested actually in that weird guy with wings because I didn't really get enough of the priestess part to get interested in it. I guess there were a few things that were intriguing, but also I did find the writing quite, I guess this is what you get when you're reading older books. Although I say that, what this did remind me a little bit of was like Robin Hobb books. And I think maybe it's about the same age, so maybe that's why. So that actually influenced me trying to prioritize this in my bigger priority list. So for this video, obviously we have no priority yet. We just have this one. But in my bigger priority, so I have made a list of prioritized lists of all the series that I want to read because there's so many at this point that I've tried and prioritized. So I think I'm going to put this in the want to read list because in the want to read list, I have the Windsingers series by Megan Lindholm, which is also Robin Hobb, and that has harpies, which are like flying people. So when it came to prioritizing this, immediately my mind went to Windsingers and started comparing it to that. I still think I would prefer Windsingers because I prefer Robin Hobb's writing style, and I feel like that had a lot more emotion in the story. Whereas this, I didn't quite feel any of the emotions. I know it's only the beginning, but Robin Hobb can make me feel emotions right from the beginning. Trudi Canavan didn't quite pull it off in this. So I'm going to put it lower than Windsingers, and then I'm actually going to put it under Ithaca by Claire North because I still thought I preferred the writing style and the setup of Ithaca. But I will put this above Perseus Spur because I thought the setup and the writing style of this were better than that. So that's that one. Then I'm going to read my other Trudi Canavan book that I wanted to try, Magician's Guild, which is the first book in the Black Magicians trilogy, which I believe there are 2 trilogies called the Essalieyan world. Anyway, we'll start with the Magician's Guild because that is the first one in that world and in that trilogy. Okay, so I've read the first chapter of Magician's Guild, and firstly, I don't like the audiobook. It's one of those ones where it seems like the main character is a young girl, and then the audiobook narrator is a guy, and I'm just like, why? Why would you do that? And maybe we're going to get more perspective further in the book of these like magicians who are going to be tracking her down. So maybe that's why, but I didn't really like his voice anyway, so probably not. So I forget what I said in the last clip, but basically this is the story of this young girl, and she has been part of this purge. So it seems like the previous king introduced this concept where every year at winter they kick all the poor people out of the city. And the people always try to fight back a little bit, but they have these magicians who are really powerful that kind of enforce the purge, and so there's not really that much they can do against these magicians other than just cause a little bit of trouble. It seems like this young girl was part of this gang of younger people that are causing trouble, but her auntie and uncle that are looking after her, because her parents are dead, I assume, her auntie and uncle are like, don't hang out with those guys, they're too much trouble. However, she overhears something that makes her think that they're going to be in trouble, so she runs off to tell them about it and then gets involved in the trouble. And then when she's facing up against these magicians, they're like there with this like magical barrier so nobody can touch them. And she throws a rock at them, but when she's doing it, she like puts all her anger and like frustration into it and like wills the rock to go through the barrier. And it does, and it hits like the main magician in the head, and he like falls over, and it's all very dramatic. And then the other magicians don't seem to know who it was, but this main magician does. He's like, get her, but also like, don't hurt her. Because I think the idea is that she, to have thrown the rock through the barrier, must have a lot of magic, and they want that magic. So I was actually thinking when I did this update that I would say that intro didn't really give me that much that didn't feel just like typical fantasy. Although I will say the purge is a little bit interesting. Like, why does this king think that it's a good idea to kick everybody out of the city? And like, what are the bigger ramifications of that? But I don't really know. Like, I don't think I got enough from the story to really engage me emotionally. And I don't really have an idea of where it's going. So to me, it felt a little bit less original than Priestess of the White, or like this had some elements where I was like, oh, I wonder what she'll do with that, whereas the other one I was just like, okay, typical fantasy story, I got it, which maybe isn't fair, but this is what you get from first chapter impressions. So I think I'm going to put the Magician's Guild under this in priority, and actually because I've only got one book for this video, I think I better make a graphic to track my priority for this video. So that's going to be where we're at so far with these 2 books. And then in the bigger priority, I put Priestess of White in want to read, but I'm going to put Magician's Guild in will read. Like, I think I would still want to read it, but maybe not as much as the want to read one. So we'll put it in will read, and I think I'm going to put it under The Wanderers, because The Wanderers was like a zombie apocalypse pandemic story, which seemed more interesting, and the writing was better, and the characters felt more developed. But I did think actually the writing of Magician's Guild was better actually even than Priestess of the White, which is interesting because I think Priestess of the White was published later as far as Trudi Canavan goes. So that's weird. But anyway, in the bigger priority, I'm going to put it above Hounds of the Underworld because again, I thought the writing was better. Although the setup of Hounds of the Underworld was maybe more unique and interesting, but the writing made me doubt whether it could pull that off. So I think The Magician's Guild will be quite a solid fantasy, even if it doesn't do anything particularly special. Maybe it will. Maybe it will. Anyway, the next book that I'm going to try for this video is Green Rider by Kristen Britton. So this is one that I actually read before. I'm pretty sure when I was about 20. No, maybe I can figure out when. Not necessarily. So I remember a big thing for me when I was younger is that I used to just find books mainly at the library, and there was no other way to really hear about or find out about fantasy books. And I think most of the local bookshops didn't really have very big fantasy or sci-fi sections. However, in 1999, according to this, we got a Borders bookstore, and it was so big and it had so many books and had this massive fantasy section. And so I would go there and just look at the books for ages. And that's part of where I started reading a lot more books and finding out a lot more books than I'd ever known about before. But Green Rider came out in 1998, so I think it must have been somewhere near the beginning of Borders that I read it. But unfortunately, Borders did close in 2007, so we only had that amazing Borders store for a short period of time. Anyway, Green Rider. I picked up Green Rider wanting it and expecting it to be like the Valdemar series by Mercedes Lackey, because both of them have these people on horses. In Green Rider, we have this young girl, and then I think she comes across this Green Rider who's been hurt, and she has to take his horse and his message and try and get it to the king to like save the day. And of course, in the Valdemar books, we also have these people working for royalty who have these magical horses. So I thought Green Rider was going to have magical horses, but I don't actually think the horses are magical, although this is a 7-book series with the 8th book about to come out later this year. And when I look at the covers, maybe the horses do get magical. I mean, it is a fantasy series. And I think maybe there was a little bit of like Slavic mythology in there. I might be remembering that wrong. Anyway, at the time, I only read the first 2 books, probably because those were the only ones that were out. I'm pretty sure I remember the second book being released and seeing it at Borders. But I think I gave up on that series just because it wasn't giving me what I wanted. I wanted like a Valdemar copy, basically. But now, it's been a long time since then, like another 20 years, and I've read a lot more different fantasy books. And I think I would be coming to this with a much more open mind to read it as what it is. Also, a lot of people have been reading this lately, so I'm hoping that I'll love it. But let's try the first chapter. Okay, so I read the first chapter of Green Rider. Actually, I read the first chapter and the second one because I'm treating, like there weren't chapter numbers, and I'm treating the first chapter as a prologue because that chapter was basically setting up this dark one, some kind of shadow man. I can't remember what it called him anymore, but he's some kind of like dark, I don't even know if he's human. I kind of think he's not because he referred to some other people as mortal, which implies that he is not. He was like, I can understand why they're in a rush because they're mortal. So he's trying to get through this wall that was built by the humans from long ago. And the idea is that they had a lot of magic and understood a lot about magic, which is how they were able to wall off this like evil forest behind the wall. But now modern day humans don't know anything about that kind of magic. And so they haven't been maintaining the wall and they wouldn't know how to rebuild it. And this shadow guy is going to try and break it open. So that was the prologue. I will say the audiobook didn't even get me past that first chapter or prologue or whatever it was. And so I don't know how representative it would be of how she was going to narrate the rest of the book, but it came across as really boring and I didn't really like her voice, so I don't think I would listen to it via audiobook. So then we get the first chapter where we're following our main character, whose name I have forgotten, but it started with a K. But she has been in trouble at her school. It seems like it's a university type thing. She got in trouble, and so she's run off to try and get home so she can tell her father about her side of things before he finds out from the university that she's going to be kicked out. But on her way there, she comes across this Green Rider, and we did learn in the prologue that the Shadow Man guy was going to go and chase down a Green Rider. So it seems like it's this guy, and he's got a message that he really needs to get to the king. He's like, it's like life or death, but he can't take it because he's in the middle of dying. So he passes this message on to her, and it seems like he's done some kind of sneaky initiation of her as a Green Rider so that she can take this message. And also, the horse is not magical, but the horse definitely knows more than it's letting on. So maybe the horse is magical. Also, it did seem like what the shadow guy was doing was a little bit music-based. I am interested if it would be music-based. I know 20-year-old me who loved the Valdemar books would have loved for it to have been music-based, which does make me wonder if I was disappointed in that aspect of it. Who knows? Anyway, I grabbed my iPad so I could tell you where I am putting it. So in terms of this video, I'm going to put it at the top because I did, even though maybe the setup wasn't as unique as the Trudi Canavan ones, I did find the writing a lot easier, and it did have that musical element as well. So I'm going to put it at the top for this video. Then for the bigger priority, I'm just going to put it in interested. I tried to argue myself up to intrigued with that musical element. I couldn't quite do it. So interested, and I'm going to put it under a Master of Djinn just because I felt like the concept wasn't quite as unique and interesting as a Master of Djinn. But I'm going to put it above Senlin Ascends because the main character was way more likable. And I'm still worried with Senlin Ascends that I'm going to hate that main character and it's all going to be downhill from there. But anyway, that's where it's going in the bigger priority. So next, I have a few books from Michelle West, and I've realized that they're all from the same world. Oh, I don't have here... Wait, I'll look it up. Oh, I should also say Michelle West is also Michelle Sagara. She has some other books out as Michelle Sagara. I think West is her married name, but it could also be she just published under that initially because people are racist. Here. So, overall, it's a 9-book series. The first 2 books are The Sacred Hunt. Then we have 6 books for The Sun Sword, and then another 4 books, which are House War. And I think it's pretty much chronological, except maybe the first 2 books of the House War go before The Sun Sword. Anyway, I think what I remember about this series is that I did read some of The Broken Crown before, but then I ran out of time, something happened, life, and I didn't finish it. I wonder if it's because I thought I was missing something, and then I realized there were those earlier books from another series. Then I also think I picked up the first one of those, and again, life didn't continue with it. Maybe I wasn't loving it, but I do remember I really liked what I read of The Broken Crown, so I don't know. I have read the other things by Michelle West and liked some, not liked others. I think I've read some short stories by her that I really liked. Also, the art is Jodie A. Lee, and I love Jodie A. Lee's art, so I would like to like these books so that I could own the books. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to try the first chapter of the first book of all 3 series in this world. So I'm going to read 3 first chapters and then check back in with you with maybe a plan about my priority for this bigger series, but maybe also whether I actually want to read the whole bigger series or just try and focus in or start somewhere else that's not the beginning. I don't know, we'll see. So I think this is the first time where I didn't actually read all of the first chapters because these chapters were long. No, it's not true. For Hunter's Oath, I've read the first chapter. For The Broken Crown, I've actually realized by looking at the audiobook that maybe I didn't read the first chapter, that I was reading more of like a prologue part, but I don't think the Kindle sample got to the end of the prologue part because it was so long, and like there was 2 chapters in that part, and both of them were so long. Like I read for ages and ages, and then I was like, how much more do I have to go? And it's annoying with the Kindle samples because they don't tell you how much is left in the chapter. They just tell you how much is left in the sample. So I was just tapping through the pages to see how many pages left to go, and it was like 1 million. So I stopped. I thought I've read enough to get a feel for it, but now realizing that it was a prologue and I think following different characters than even the main story follows, maybe, then I don't know how good that was. I did listen, so the audiobook for that, there's no audiobook for Hunter's Oath, but the audiobook for The Broken Crown is available on Audible Plus, so I could listen to that for free if I still had Audible at the time when I get around to this, which is likely to be far in the future, to be honest. Spoilers for the prioritization. So I was able to listen to the first chapter, and like the audiobook was fine. I mean, given how long these chapters were and how long these books are, I don't know if current me has the like stamina to get through them without using the audiobooks, because then the Hidden City for the third series had chapters, but it felt like the chapters were more like parts, and actually in all of these books each chapter, whatever it was broken up into like lots of smaller bits with like little dashes or whatever in between the smaller bits, and those smaller bits to me were just really breaking up the pacing. I was always like, well, we're still in the same scene following the same characters, so why did we need a little separate section? It made sense actually in the first book where it was doing that, because we're following two main characters, the one that's chasing and the one that's being chased, and like it would do that little dash thing whenever it would change to the other perspective, so that made sense. And that one was the chapter I got through. It was also the most interesting because we were introduced to these like hunters, these people who have dogs, and they can like somehow psychically bond with the dogs to be able to like smell the scent that the dogs are smelling, and like it helps them to hunt whoever they're hunting. In this case, he's hunting this young boy who we're also getting the perspective of, and it's clear from the beginning that it's really more of a recruitment type situation, even though this poor orphan boy who's working as a thief doesn't know that that's the situation, but it's going to be the situation. So at least that situation with the dogs was kind of interesting. The second book, we had this young woman who's a healer, and she's being trained and she's being told, don't just heal people on the street, because once you start doing that, they'll just never leave you alone and they'll drain you of all your abilities and you won't be able to help people when they really need it. But then she draws the attention of this guy. Is he a guy? Is he more of a demon-y thing or something like that? I don't know, because the chapter went on so long that I got bored of waiting to find out. Also, it kept doing that thing where it was breaking into little bits, and this guy is chasing her and she's running, and like actually leading up to what happened that got his attention. That was interesting. But then this chase went on, and I feel like a chase scene should be quite fast-paced and get to the point to like give you the intensity and pacing of a chase, but it was the longest, slowest paced chase scene I've ever read. And yeah, I don't know. This is though the one that I remember reading before. And I think because this is what I read, what I'm telling you about is the prologue part. But I think the first chapter actually follows this young girl that I remember the book being about when I read it previously. So I think that it's actually going to be about her. Oh, I don't know. I didn't really get a good idea from what I read about what this book is even going to be about. And as I said, the writing was just so slow-paced, and I can see maybe it being to some people's taste, but I just wanted something more to happen and to like know what was happening. Then the Hidden City was a little bit better. We're following this guy who obviously like doesn't want to have any connections, and he changes his outfit, changes his clothes to be whatever he needs to be, and he's going out to some kind of like crime meeting probably, but along the way he runs into this young girl, or she tries to steal from him or does steal from him, and he runs after her and becomes very intrigued about her, and that was interesting. But again, that chase quite slow paced, and so by the time I got to the end of the chase scene and the chapter wasn't finished, again I tapped through my Kindle. How long to the end? 1 million pages. I could not. So, given that I could not, I'm going to put these quite low in the priority for this video. I'm going to put them at the bottom, because even though in some ways, like I've complained about the writing a lot, I would have said it was more readable than the Trudi Canavan ones, but like more readable, but nothing was happening. At least in the Trudi Canavan ones, I'm getting some kind of reward for pushing through the dense writing. I feel like Trudi Canavan, it was kind of like more dense, older writing style. And I guess probably these Michelle West ones are also older writing style, but it wasn't that it was dense and like you're having to take a lot of time with each sentence to unpack it. It was like there's so much words and nothing's happening. So you're having to read through so many words to even get to something that you can take out of it. Does that make sense? Anyway, I'm putting it down the bottom for this video. Then in the bigger priority, I'm going to put it in the will read. I still think I want to read this for the covers, for past me, for nostalgia, for my curiosity. But I'm going to put it quite low in the will read list. I'm going to just put it above A Wizard of Earthsea because I think I was less interested in A Wizard of Earthsea in that writing style. Even though I've heard that the second book in A Wizard of Earthsea might be more to my taste. But for now, I'm going to put it there. So, and I remember saying The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet didn't give me much to like make me interested. But at least it would be easier to read. And like, at least things were happening. Then I have a few series that I want to try by Mercedes Lackey. Firstly, we have The Heirs of Alexandria, which she wrote with Eric Flint and Dave Frere. And I can see that this is now a 5-book series, but it looks like Mercedes Lackey wasn't involved in the 5th and latest book. And I believe this is like an alternate history from like the 1500s. Set in Venice, and there's some kind of magical threat that these young boys who are thieves are going to have to get involved in. I also kind of remember, because I did read this one, and there's a lot I don't remember, and I honestly don't know why I didn't continue the series. Possibly a lack of time, because I think when I picked this up I was at university. But I kind of remember that there was a character who worked in like the equivalent of the patent office, and maybe someone who was like a doctor type person. I might be wrong. Anyway, I will read the first chapter of that one and we'll see what we think. Okay, so the first chapter of Heirs of Alexandria is another one that requires explanation. I started just reading it before I realized I was reading a prologue, but there's not just one prologue. I'm pretty sure there's 5, but I may have lost count because I was skipping through the Kindle sample to find them all. The audiobook doesn't label them as separate parts. It just has chapter 1 and chapter 2, which covers all 5 of the prologue parts. So I did read the first 2 of those prologue parts, and it seems like they're following like different groups of people that are, for whatever reason, gonna make their way to Venice to be a part of some going-ons. The first one that I read was about this guy who's like come from, I've forgotten, some kind of Viking type situation, but he's come, I've forgotten everybody's titles already. Anyway, he's come to like mentor the nephew of the Roman emperor or something, who seems like he's a drunken loser, so that's going to be a lot of work. And they're going to pretend to be knights and go to Venice for reasons that I didn't entirely understand, but perhaps just trying to make less of a drunken loser of this nephew. And then the second prologue that I read was about these priests, and there was a lot of information that I was struggling to absorb. I do think part of the problem is that currently I'm reading this book, which is set in like around 1800 in London and France. And so this is really the full amount of history I can currently absorb. And so having a bunch of like Roman history from around the 1500s, just too much for my brain at the moment. And I'm just not sure like how much of this am I supposed to be absorbing or not. And I think as well, part of my brain is aware that I'm not actually going to be reading this book. So I'm like, do I need to know that right now? Probably not. So they were talking about a bunch of rubbish. I didn't really follow it all, but the summary was they're going to go to Venice. And then I'm pretty sure, even though I didn't read them, that the next 3 prologue parts will also be people heading to Venice. I didn't read them because the audiobook is telling me that it's like over an hour before you get to chapter 1. And again, I couldn't invest that much time at the moment. So then I did read the actual chapter 1. And this we're following Benito, who's like this young boy involved in this thieving. And actually though, the star of the first chapter is this girl named Kat, who's like a smuggler. And Benito's kind of just like tagging along with her and helping her out. And then they end up kind of observing a bunch of other people coming and doing some kind of ritual. Now, I suspect if I'd read all those prologue parts that I would have had a much better idea of what was going on, like what they were observing, but obviously they don't know what they're observing. And also there was some shenanigans about like hiding under the gondola or whatever and like hiding something out of these people's like range. I don't know. I didn't follow all of that either. So, as well, the audiobook sample, no. I felt like I was being read a children's story, and this is not a children's story. So I don't want that tone of voice in my reading experience for this book. But at least chapter 1 wasn't as long as all those prologue parts. Chapter 1 was actually quite reasonably length. And I was tempted to actually even then go into chapter 2 where we get the other brother Marco's perspective. I kind of assume from the synopsis that all these people that we're learning about are somehow going to come together and realize that they need to follow Benito and Marco in something to do with the Lion of Alexandria, something magic. So, in some ways, I would say that I didn't get that much from this to like intrigue me, but it does feel like a very fleshed out fantasy world. And again, the nostalgia is like drawing a lot of curiosity out of me. So, in terms of this video, I actually think I'm going to put it just under Green Rider because like I think it's because I've read so much Mercedes Lackey in the past, and so the writing style just felt very nostalgic, familiar, comfortable, and I was interested in the fullness of the world. So that's where I'm going to put it for this video. Then in the bigger priority, like Green Rider, I'm going to put it in interested, like not intrigued, but I am interested. I'm not going to put it as high as Green Rider, obviously, but I think I'll put it under Senlin Ascends because Senlin Ascends, even though I think I said before I didn't think the character would be that likable and the writing style might be a struggle, it was probably more unique of a setup. But then if I compare it to Jade City, which I'm going to put it above, I really wasn't that interested in the setup or the characters of Jade City, even though of course everyone raves about that series. So I'm going to put it above that. So that's where we're at with the bigger priority. Then next, I'm going to try another series by Mercedes Lackey, although this one she wrote with James Mallory, and it is The Outstretched Shadow, which is the first book in a trilogy called The Obsidian Mountain. Now, I did read the first book, I think, just when it came out. It says 2003. Does it seem feasible? Maybe. So this one, I've kind of forgotten what happens, but the general setup is we're following this young boy who's trying to train to become a knight. I think he's doing it really badly, but then for whatever reason, he stumbles into the world of elves and becomes amazing or something. I don't know. The cover does have a unicorn though, so that's promising. So let's see what we think of the first chapter. Okay, so I read the first chapter of The Outstretched Shadow and I do kind of remember now a bit more about what was going on. So our main character, Kellen, is the son of like the High Mage, and this is in a world where the mages control everything and the economy is all about magic. So if you have magic, you can make a lot of money because basically everything is done by magic, and as well the mages like control everything. So if you think about it, it means if people are going to try and do things by non-magical means, the mages can be like, oh, no, we don't do that. So the world is very controlled. And Kellen doesn't really appreciate that. His father is very insistent that he has to become a mage and he has to do well at that profession. Again, he's really not interested in the whole way that it's all working. And he kind of has enough privilege to see a lot of the corruption of the system, even though he stands to benefit from it. So the first chapter, oh, is this another one? It's taken me a couple of days to film this update and I've forgotten, but I think once again, I did not read the whole first chapter. Let me just double check. Yeah, I did not read the first whole chapter because from the audiobook, I can see that the first chapter is an hour and a half long. Do you know how long it's going to take me to read it with my eyes? A long time. And I felt like I'd read enough to get a feel for it. If I take 2 hours or more to read every first chapter from this video, it's going to take forever. It's already taking forever, to be honest. Anyway, as well, the audiobook narrator just had this like really bitchy tone. Like, I don't know, maybe what I mean is quite like a strict kind of tone. And again, it's that one where our main character is this guy. So why have we got a female audiobook narrator? Maybe there's going to be another main character, but that's not what I remember. I mainly remember it being Kellen. So I don't think I would listen to the audiobook because I just didn't like her tone of voice or her narration style. But I was interested in like this whole magic as the economy, magic as capitalism kind of system. So I do think in terms of prioritization, I'm going to put this pretty high. For this video, I'm actually going to put it right under Green Rider because I got more from the setup than I did from the Shadow of the Lion one. I do think Green Rider, the main character, was a little bit more likable, and I liked the magical setup a bit more, and maybe I even liked the writing style a bit more. But I was pretty happy with the Outstretched Shadows writing. So that's where it's going to go in this video, which means for the bigger priority, it is going to go in that interested list, and I'm going to put it right under the Green Rider. Like, I still think maybe the setup wasn't quite as unique as Senlin Ascends, but it is kind of like a theme or a topic that I'm kind of interested in. And again, I think I like the writing style better. So that's where it's going to go. Then the next series that I'm going to be trying is the Diana Tregarde series. I actually have one book from the series here, but this is the second book. On the back, it has the first and the third books pictured. I'll put the whole series here. So this, I definitely read some of these in the past. Maybe this one, honestly, I own it, but I can't remember. Like, did I buy this with the intention to read it when I got the first book in the series? Or did I read this? I'm pretty sure I'd read the first one though. In this series, I'm pretty sure it is about this woman named Diana Tregarde. She's a witch. Basically goes around kind of like a private investigator type person, saving the day when there's magical problems. Maybe a little bit comparative to like the Dresden Files. So I've been wanting to reread this for a little while. I'm a little bit concerned because I saw some people recently trying to call out Mercedes Lackey for some problematic elements in this series, and I'm kind of hoping I won't find any because Mercedes Lackey did so much to like open my mind and like bring me to a like more open-minded perspectives of different ways of living. Like, I want to believe that anything in here that people view as problematic is more like just a symptom of time and misunderstanding. But I guess I probably won't even be able to answer that within the first chapter. But I'm going to try the first chapter of the first book is called Burning Water. So let's see what happens in that. Okay, so I tried the first chapter of Burning Water, and what I was surprised by was the lack of Diana Tregarde. Like, the first chapter started out following this woman who works in a motel in Mexico City where there's a big earthquake and she gets trapped underneath the building and then kind of stumbles into something to do with Aztec gods, it seems like. And then we swapped to this other woman who's in Mexico City with her photographer husband, who's kind of an asshole. Is he her husband or just a boyfriend, an asshole boyfriend? Not sure. But then he comes across these women dressed up like Aztec goddesses. Is one of them the girl from the beginning? We think so. And they're basically offering their modeling services in return for being brought to America. And it kind of seems obvious that this Aztec god has a plan to come to America and cause some carnage. So it's an interesting setup, but it's like really in-depth in building the characters. These characters that mostly seem kind of like side characters, not that important, but I guess maybe they're more important than I think. But very slow paced, like not as long as some of the first chapters that I've tried in this video so far, but like still long enough that I did near the end skip to see how far it was to the end of the chapter. I did read the whole first chapter though, and I actually had a look at the second chapter because I was like, where's Diana Tregarde? Where is she? Not in the second chapter, or at least in the second chapter it seemed like we were going to be following this police investigator guy and he's waiting for Diana or looking for Diana. I don't know. But the lack of Diana meant I was confused about what is even going on. Also, I did have a quick listen to the audiobook. It was fine. I could probably listen to it on audiobook. It wasn't anything amazing. I feel like I don't know what I'm expecting with audiobooks at the moment. I guess the thing is, it was fine, but like the first chapter that I read with my eyes, I don't know if it's representative because we didn't get Diana. And I remember the series being much more about Diana, so now I don't know what to expect. So in terms of priority for this video, I think I'm going to put it between the two Trudi Canavan books, just because it didn't seem quite as interesting or unique as, what was that called? Priestess of the White. You know, mainly because of that guy with the wings rather than the main storyline of Priestess of the White. But anyway, I didn't think it was quite as interesting as that, but probably more interesting than the Black Magicians. And even though it was very like in depth with the character development, and so a little bit not my favorite focus and a little bit slow, I could feel it building to something. So it was like not terrible to read and it was somewhat interesting. Am I talking around in circles? I'm not sure, but that's where I'm going to put it for this video. Then in the bigger priority, it basically means I have to choose between putting it in want to read and will read. And I think it's the Aztec gods element of it. Like I don't often see stories with like Aztec gods in them. So I think because of that, I'm going to put it in want to read. And I think I'm going to put it just above Immortal Gods because even though Immortal Gods might have a more interesting setup, I did think that Burning Water was better written. But Perseus Spur felt like more unique. I don't know. I've got so many books here now. I feel like I'm starting to break my brain. We might need to change up the way I'm doing this soon once I get to the end of my current lot. I've got another video after this one, but then I think we'll have a pause and a reflection time. But I have a few more books I want to try in this video. So next, I'm going to try the first chapter of Acorna by Anne McCaffrey. So this is a series about this young girl who has like a unicorn horn. I think it's something about actually like a whole space race of unicorn people, but she initially is like an orphan. I've kind of forgotten, even though I think quite a while ago I did read a couple of these books, but maybe not in order. Like maybe I read randomly book 12 or something. I also don't remember, and I haven't prepared enough to look up how many, but I'll put maybe the series here. I think it ended up being a fairly long series, so I'll try the first chapter of that and let you know what I think. Okay, so I read the first chapter of Acorna, and before I forget, I should say, I said it was by Anne McCaffrey, but it's actually by Anne McCaffrey and Margaret Ball. Well, actually, it looks like the first two books were Anne McCaffrey and Margaret Ball, and then after that, it was like Wait, I just looked at it. Elizabeth Ann Scarborough, who was helping to write it. So I'm not really clear like what was the split of the work there. It almost makes me wonder if it was Anne McCaffrey's ideas and then these other authors were doing more of the writing. Although the writing style did feel fairly Anne McCaffrey-esque. Whatever that means. Just, I think maybe the way the different characters, like the way their banter was working, the way they were talking to each other. And Anne McCaffrey has this particular, I don't know if it's maybe just an older writing style, which is quite verbose. Also, I feel like going into a story like Acorna, the Unicorn Girl, you're expecting a fantasy story, but it starts out very firmly in the sci-fi camp. Like the beginning is actually very Superman-esque. So we've got this couple on the spaceship and they're being chased by some kind of other aliens that just leave no prisoners and like torture and kill people in a really horrible way. So really they see the only way out as to kill themselves before these other aliens get there. However, they have this young daughter who they decide that basically they're going to blow up their ship and try and destroy the aliens at the same time as sending their daughter out in this like escape pod, and they're hoping that somehow their daughter will escape, even though they think probably not that likely, but let's just try. So as you can guess, Acorna is this little child, and these three guys pick her up. So they are like a survey team going between asteroids and like doing some kind of analysis, and they're not really, it's a little bit like My Three Dads, actually. So we've got this really young girl and they are now looking after her on the spaceship that's more for like rock analysis. And actually this is where I admit again, I didn't read the whole first chapter because I just felt like it was too long. I'd gotten a real good feel for what was going on. And I had a look through the rest of the chapter. It looks like just kind of Acorna like learning to be safe on the spaceship with these guys. I think they are going to take her somewhere else, but I didn't really need to read that long of a first chapter. And I almost felt like if I read that much, I'm spoiling myself for when I actually get to properly reading it. So I didn't finish the first chapter of this book either. Oh, and also there is no audiobook as far as I could tell. So I didn't listen to the audiobook or try that. It's not an option. So in terms of the priority, I'm actually having like an internal conflict. Part of me feels like because I've been trying all these older fantasy books, having that little taste of sci-fi, I'm like, oh, some sci-fi. That's way more exciting. And that's making me want to put it up the top. But if I'm honest with myself, even though I did like the sci-fi framing of this unicorn girl, I'm not in love with the writing style. Oh, although actually I did just remember something I'm a little bit sus about is the name that these aliens that were attacking in the beginning, their name was very similar to the name of the survey ship that these guys were in. Not exactly the same, but similar enough that I'm like, are they humans? The aliens? Are they? I honestly can't remember. So actually, maybe it's not just the sci-fi thing. Let me put Acorna up the top just because I want to know what's actually going on with those other aliens that are attacking. I hope we find out. I'm sure we must do. So for this video, Acorna will go up the top. And then in the bigger priority, I was thinking that might get us somewhere above the interested list for this video, but actually, I don't think I can make the argument that I'm intrigued. I'm just interested. So we're going to put it in the interested list. And I actually think I can only just put it above Green Rider directly because I still think Master of Jinn was a more interesting setup and like the characters seemed more interesting and the writing was more enjoyable. So that's where we're going to put it in the bigger priority. So next, I actually want to try the first chapter of something I probably should have had on my list already because this is a book series that I've owned for a long time and I've always been planning to reread it, but I never really knew like when was I going to do that. And I think now is the time for me to work out what's the priority of rereading this series. So this is the Saga of the Exiles by Julian May, and it does also link into the Galactic Maloo series by Julian May because the Galactic Maloo is like set in the future of this world, or is this set in the future of that? It's hard to know because of time loops. So basically, in this, there is this like portal that they found that will send people back to like the Pliocene era, I think. And so they start just putting criminals through it. They're like, well, we don't want you here, but we feel like it's a little bit over the top to kill you. So you just go through there. You'll be back in the past where you can't do anyone any harm and you can live your life however you can manage to. So with them following the story of these criminals as they're back in the Pliocene era with a little bit of technology that they've been sent back to help them survive. However, when they get there, it is not what they were expecting. There are some more things going on back in the past. So this one, I'm actually very excited about rereading. So let's hope that reading the first chapter only increases my excitement. I'm a little bit worried because I've just opened the book and seen the font size, but we'll try our best to at least get through the first chapter. Oh, it looks like glorious short chapters. I think I can do it. Okay, so it has taken me a while to get to the final clip of this video. I don't know, maybe my roots will give that away. How long were they at the start of this video? I feel like they were a lot less. But regardless, I have now read the first chapter of The Many Colored Lands, and it was not what I was expecting, or like not what I remembered from having read this previously. I thought it was going to start right in with these characters being sent back, like these criminals being sent back in time. But no, we didn't get anywhere near that, or maybe a little bit near that. So actually I read 4 chapters. This is the only book in this video where I've actually read more than I necessarily had to, because actually all the chapters are really short. So I read the prologue, which had 3 chapters inside it. So I read all of those 3 chapters because it was only like 10 pages. And then I read the first chapter of the first part as well. And every single bit was different. So the first chapter actually gets right into these aliens arriving on what we can only assume is Earth. They call it the Many-Colored Land. They seem to have been like on the run from something. They feel very like elf-like in the way that they're talking something about it, but their ship is basically like giving up. It's some kind of alive ship, but it's dying. So it's basically delivered them to Earth, and they're like, well, we hope we can survive here. Hopefully it's far enough out of the way of everything else that no one will know we're here and we can just survive. And they have these like golden talks around their necks, some of them, one of them, that seem to give them certain powers. Then the next chapter is some kind of, I think, like primitive humans, and this young human boy has discovered this talk and put it on and can do some kind of something, psychic ability, something. Who really knows? His mother is not a fan. She's freaking out about it. Then the next chapter, we do get this scientist guy who has found this anomaly where in this particular area, if he puts this device, he can, well, what he's actually doing is like he'll put a carrot in it, send it back in time, and then wait a while. And when he brings it forward, perhaps some animal would have been tempted by the carrot to try and eat it, and he will bring that animal forward, but it will immediately like feel the effects of time since the Pliocene era, and so it will just immediately disintegrate, and he has to use like some kind of hologram to watch it back in slow motion. And also, at this point of time, humanity's in contact with all these alien races out part of the galactic milieu, and so these aliens are coming to Earth to see this like anomaly that he's found, but it only works in this one particular spot. So they're like, not really that useful, interesting, but we don't know what to do with it. So that's kind of the prologue. Then the first chapter of the main part, honestly have no idea what relation it has to anything. It's like these humans are reenacting medieval France for alien tourists, except I don't even think they're on Earth. And we're just kind of getting a little brief snippet of the characters who are like putting on this reenactment. And that's it. Like, I don't know. That was weird. That was not what I was expecting it to be written like. Also, the writing is old-fashioned, I guess is the best way to say it. And it doesn't really tell you a lot. Like, you're getting these little scenes and there's lots of like inferences and references to things that are going on. Like the fact that humanity has hooked up with all these aliens is never really explained to you. You just have to pick up on it from the aliens being mentioned. I don't know, it's kind of weird, but I kind of like it because I feel like I'm trying to work out a puzzle, and the ideas about the world that is being created here are really interesting, and that is what I remember from this series previously. So, I don't know, I think it feels quite real, even though it's weird. And sci-fi that feels real and has lots of cool ideas is my favorite kind of sci-fi. So, in terms of this video, I'm actually going to put this at the top of the priority because it still remains the one that I'm the most excited about rereading. And then in terms of the bigger priority, I'm actually going to put this in the intrigued list, and I'm going to put it right at the top of the intrigued list. I think I did fight with myself a little bit about whether to put it above The Girl in the Stars or not, because The Girl in the Stars, that first chapter, had a really cliffhanger first chapter, so I do want to get to that. But I feel like overall the ideas weren't as interesting as this one. I don't know, I'm rethinking now. Should this even be in the next group up? No, I think I'll hold it back, mainly because that writing is difficult to get through, and the tiny font, I might have to try and read this in some other way. But I actually, I don't want to have to pay to read it when I already own it. And I don't know if my library has it. Let me just check. I don't think my library does have it. And I also have to say, anytime I see these books in secondhand stores, they're still a similar format. This is an omnibus, but even the individual books I have in the series are still I'm pretty sure the same kind of font inside. So that's not my favorite. But I am very interested in this series. So I'm glad we ended on this actually, because when I look at most of the books that I tried in this video, they didn't end up that high in the priority. A lot of them I feel kind of meh about, and I think I still want to reread a lot of them, but more for nostalgia. I think this has really shown me that my reading tastes have changed a lot since I was in my 20s. Back then, I was much more about just pure ideas. I didn't care so much about the writing, and I loved character-focused stories, whereas these days, if it doesn't have a plot, I'm struggling to keep my interest. But who knows, I might end up loving some of these rereads when I do finally get to them. Let me know if you have read any of these. I'd love to know, was it recently? A lot of these are older, so it might not have been. But if it was recently, how did you find them? Do you think I'm going to love them on my reread? I guess we'll see in time. Anyway, let's chat down in the comments. Do subscribe if you'd like to see more of my bookish videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you are doing well, and I will see you next time.